I know that I've been streaming on Twitch and making content on TikTok for a couple years now, and one thing that I don't do enough, despite my name, is talk about runes and like Scandinavian runic stuff. So tonight I just wanted to do a little bit of a blurb to talk about some recent discoveries that we're having in the field of runic studies, because it's just been a crazy year in 2023 for people who do Scandinavian runic studies, and they just can't stop catching W's. So I want to be able to just highlight some of the newer stuff that's going on, and then I also want to showcase like one or two other less recent but still pretty recent finds that I think will just kind of help flesh out what sorts of things we deal with in runic studies when we're dealing with looking at these types of inscriptions. So I think that'll be pretty neat. Hey, thanks for tuning into the video. Listen, before we get started, I'm going to take this here hand crossbow with a suction tip. I'm going to take a shot at that target behind my shoulder. When I hit it, you're going to subscribe to this channel. You want to do it anyway? So as those of you who follow me on other social medias probably saw, I talked a lot about this back at the beginning of the year. This runestone, the Sverringwood runestone, is a phenomenal discovery. This is the oldest runestone that has been discovered in Scandinavia, bar none. It dates back to as far as potentially the 1st century AD, meaning sometime between the year 0 and 100. Crazy old. And with this, we see an Elder Futhark, a very like proto-Elder Futhark inscription. In here it says Idibarug, or Idibarung. Mixed thoughts, it's still in the interpretive phase. Discovered in was in eastern Norway, and it was on and around a site of what was probably a burial or mortuary monument. There was evidence of kind of like burned biological material in the area that could have been some sort of pyre or elements of a burial, as well as some other goods and things in the area that indicated it might have been like a grave or a mortuary site. As I said, that the big inscription that's legible is this Idibarug inscription on the front there, but it also includes some other designs as well. Let's see if we can get this image up here. So it's kind of hard to tell, but you could see that there's like kind of a scratched up series of runes over here, which if you highlight it could potentially be F-U-Th, Futh, which are like the first 3 letters of the Futhark, which a lot of times were just carved onto runestones willy-nilly. And then over on this side, it's hard to tell without it being highlighted, but there it does seem to be like some sort of grid, which may have been another type of inscription. So some people are initially thinking that this might have been a runestone too. This Idibarug inscription could have been an individual, either the person who carved it or the person who the monument was potentially laid for. So it is it's crazy how old this thing is. Potentially 2,000 years old. Completely insane. And it will provide a whole bunch of new context for how these Elder Futhark inscriptions are being conducted in the earliest portions of the Iron Age in Scandinavia. And especially with this being in Norway, which is obviously like a little further in to the cultural hub of the area, in my opinion at least, I don't think they talk about this, but I think this could indicate it's either one of two things, right? Either number one, that the practice of runic inscriptions in Scandinavia are starting in Norway, with this being one of the earliest and the first ones happening, right? It could be that far back in time. Or number two, that they were happening in Scandinavia even earlier than this time period, and that this is just the oldest that we're seeing in Norway, and they could have potentially been happening earlier in Sweden and Denmark, places that had more contact with the rest of Europe and, you know, the very fringes of what would have been late Roman period. So a fascinating find, the Svingerud stone. And this was just uncovered and put on display this year. Well, it might have been uncovered last year, but it was put on display and announced this year, with this article being in. This is not the only new crazy runic discovery that we have heard announced this year. Just a week or two ago, just a couple weeks ago, there was a new inscription, or rather an existing inscription that has been finally deciphered and interpreted from a golden bracteate. Bracteate being the word right there. A bracteate is like a little amulet made out of a gold coin, like these guys down here. They're basically little bits of gold coin that have been turned into a piece of jewelry. And so this bracteate from the Vindalev hoard is the first known inscription which details the god Odin. The new inscription, which refers to a figure on it by the name of Yaga or Yagas, he is Odin's man, is what they say about him. They say this Yaga's figure is Odin's man. And that is, oh gosh, I just realized that you can't really see it on this page. There. The inscription on this bracteate, which dates to the 5th century, you know, the 400s, the early 400s, refers to the god Odin. The leader on it is named Yaga or Yagas, and it says he is Odin's man, which I think makes sense. The two individuals who did the decipherment are Christer Vassus and Lisbeth Emer. Their interpretation, which this hoard was discovered a number of years ago, but has just been getting properly translated. And this this interpretation, I think, is a pretty good one considering the context. They point this out, but this inscription was one of the most difficult that they've ever had to interpret. This is, again, another inscription in the Elder Futhark, meaning the Iron Age proto. You could see it along the top of this here. You can see the Elder Futhark inscription with some alternate forms of letters, runic symbols, and words that are potentially not used in the same sort of context all the time. But part of the reason why it makes it so difficult, that in combination with the fading. But let me see, because there was one picture that I saw somewhere. I don't think I have it here. There was one picture where they x-rayed it, and the image really popped. This bracteate, another cool thing about this is that it was likely made from a piece of Roman gold. So it was likely a Roman gold coin that was then flattened out, repurposed, and reused into this kind of figure. You could see here on some of these coins, I'm going to zoom in on the image, and you could see here that they have a very kind of Roman-esque vibe to them with their art, and that's what they're doing. They're repurposing old pieces and using them in jewelry, a sort of honor, like a combination of like a kind of honorific of previous cultures that came before, and also an odd form of like repurposing, you know, like an adaptation of this previous culture and the technology and the things that they had, and turning it into their own. I'm just going to keep scrolling this back and forth. This whole thing is being super finicky with how it's going to sit on the page. Now, this, as I said, it was a number of years ago. This was found in late 2020. And it includes an entire hoard full of a bunch of them. That was that image down below that we were looking at with all of these things. Comes in at, you know, right around the turn of the right around the turn of the century, from the end of the 4th century, mid to end 4th century into the 5th century, or 5th and 6th century to some extent. And this inscription, which again I'm just going to gloss over I'm going to gloss over and just mention it briefly. Obviously, like one thing that everybody points out is the very obvious swastika on it, which despite the abhorrent modern context for the swastika, it was a symbol used during Iron Age Scandinavia, in particular in artistic styles. In this context, it likely represents a sun with the semicircle underneath being a moon symbol. This figure right here is Yaga, or Yagas, and he seems to be riding on top of a horse. He's got the ear of the horse right there going into his mouth. And so I don't know what the symbology of the ear in the mouth is meant to represent. It's possible they might go over that in the article, and we could scroll down and take a look. But the image and the style and everything, because there's some conflicting ideas about whether or not this figure is meant to represent Odin as well. And I don't think that's the case. I think that this is definitely not an Odinic representation, and that it is, in fact, like I said, a kind of like chieftain who is being called Odin's man. And I think that that's the better interpretation here, just because of like the style of how this guy is being represented in combination with a lot of these things. Now, I know that horses a lot of times have attributions to Odin with his with Sleipnir and all of that, but in this case, I don't think that's what's going on. I just noticed that my stream is being super choppy. So this golden bractea from the Vindalev Hoard is the newest in a series of runic inscriptions that has been unearthed, which is telling us more about Iron Age Scandinavian inscriptions, which is a time period that I admittedly, my specialty was Viking Age inscriptions. So Iron Age inscriptions are something that I'm super fascinated by. In part because of the use of the Elder Futhark runes, which are obviously more elaborate and crazier, and the clear favorites of everybody who falsely attributes them to Vikings. But on top of that, it's a time period that we know less and less about, because for as little as the Vikings were writing, right, as little as the true medieval period Viking Age Scandinavians were writing and being written about in terms of their home culture, we have as much, if not less, from Iron Age Scandinavia, right? That's a time period where we know maybe even less than we do about Viking Age Scandinavia, which means that there's a lot more secrets being hidden in there that are worth uncovering. And these runic inscriptions that we have through this Vindalev Hoard and other types of Elder Futhark inscriptions that we see on jewelry and things like that, or those that we find on these old runestones, such as the Svingarud stone. These are glimpses into that time period. And runes and written history are one of the few ways that we're able to do that. Now, I did hint at the beginning that there was another type of inscribed artifact that we were going to talk about. We've talked about stones, we've talked about jewelry, and next up we're going to talk about rune sticks. Rune sticks and rune bones are, I think, a little they are under discussed in the public sphere, but they are incredibly cool artifacts from this time period. And basically, they're exactly what they sound like. They're little pieces of bone or pieces of wood, which have been inscribed with runes for a specific purpose or a message or some sort of reason. And these reasons can vary. Sometimes they were... they had a lot of kind of cultural magic implications, right? They might have had a sort of like a curse or an invocation or something like a wish that they would hope would happen to themselves or to someone else. These could be good or they could be bad. And then they would they also had ones that actually were like letters. They were like little messages, like reminders that they would send to people. Berchal, I made you one. You would go get it, but it's in the guest room. Oh, is it in the guest room? Here, I'll get a picture of it. I'll get a picture of the rune stick that I made for Bridge Shala when we were on work, and I'll put it like right here on the video. So I'll take a picture of it and just put it like in this space So looking at these types of artifacts are neat, because of it's a completely different type of preservation that's happening here. Obviously, they're coming out of this kind of wet muck. They are biological materials, right, between the wood and the bone. So and in this case, this one's a rib. And so they're going to preserve differently than stone or metal. As such, it seems like almost like it's more, it has like a sense of more like fragility to it, right? And to me at least, I would get like a big sense of value out of something like that, just because it would feel like it's more, like it's less likely to have been preserved. But man, these are beautiful, and these inscriptions that are carved or burned or whatever into these sticks. You can see here the Norse name Bryngjord also appears on the stick, perhaps indicating that a woman of that name used the runes to express her dedication to God. But a lot of these rune stick inscriptions are just fascinating ways to peek into the everyday lives of medieval Scandinavians of medieval and Iron Age Scandinavians who had this level of literacy that was not very common at that time period, right? People were not really writing books. We don't see the same sort of birch bark writing systems that we see with the Rus, right? We don't see other forms of note-taking or recordation. We just see runic inscriptions on stones, which are oftentimes markers for specific locations or events. We see the inscriptions that are mentioned on jewelry, which could range from reverence for leadership figures, reverence to leadership figures, or devotions to gods, or just craftsman symbols. And then we see these more casual to religious implied rune sticks that'll have messages of kind of like day-to-day life. It's like you're stepping down here in importance, where you have like political, geographical, and kind of institutionalized religion runestones, followed by the kind of like merchant class, market production, religious and craftsman type inscriptions that we're seeing on jewelry, and then the kind of more lower class, common class rune sticks and runic bone inscriptions that kind of just indicate those day-to-day activities. It's a fascinating look at the class structure and how runes were used by common folk, craftsmen, and leadership in those time periods. Again, like the classes, like the the social structures of runestones and what they told us was a big part of my research when I was doing my master's. So that's kind of where that's where a lot of that kind of ties in. But that's I think that's just a really fascinating way to look at these things. And by finding these inscriptions, which obviously are varied in all kinds, this is like a much more this doesn't even look like a Futhark inscription. This looks like one of those there are these like hybridized type ones that are using, what are they calling them? Ice runes, which are kind of like a weird sort of encrypted way of doing it, kind of like a codex of like long and short staves. But there are all manner of ways of carving and writing these messages. And it's I don't know, I just think it's so cool. I think it's so cool. And all of these developments that are happening in this year are promoting new ways to interpret the older finds. You know, like a lot of these rune sticks are being found from a while ago. You know, like 1999 is when it was found, and it took 15 years to get the translation on this one because of these encrypted runes. Yeah, it's crazy to me to look at how these things happen and what sort of things we can learn about them. So one thing that we can point out is that sometimes runic inscriptions were not always the most official. Many runic inscriptions have erotic themes. Here it says, "Lovely is blue. Let's yeah." Maybe not the most piece. We'll scroll on past that. Yeah, they you know what? They're Vikings, right? They're crude. They're brash. They're anyway. That's kind of it, guys, in terms of what I wanted to talk about. We've got new runestones, new runic jewelry, new runic sticks. All of these inscriptions that are being discovered in Scandinavia are helping to drive forward these research topics. It's super cool, very fun, very neat, and I'm fascinated to see where it leads, because the more that we learn about these kind of runic inscriptions, the more that we're going to learn about the cultures that were carving them. As I said before, the different social classes that might be carving them for different purposes, and then that'll help us be able to take that knowledge and apply it to other finds that we have, other runic inscriptions, other artifacts that incorporate runes. And in modern contexts, we could take a look at how runes are being interpreted and how they're being implemented in things like, modern video games, where we can say, oh, well, if people are using these runes in these contexts and using these types of artifacts to do that, we can have a better understanding of how to use runic inscriptions when we're making video games based around Vikings and Iron Age Scandinavians. It all just kind of ties together. It's neat stuff.